Hello and welcome to the Row Over podcast. This week we're joined by Phil as normal, and we're also joined by Jono, who we've heard has got an American passport and his biggest rowing achievement is winning Henley in 2016. Congratulations and welcome, Jono.
Hello, good to be here.
So the reason we got Jono on this week is because he attended Boston University in the States and rowed at Boston for 4 years, was it?
Yeah, 4.5.
4.5 years. So we're sort of hoping to gain a bit of an insight on how uni rowing kind of works in America. We've also got Phil, who did 3 years at York Uni, and then obviously all three of us have done a bit of time at Brookes now as well. So we've got a few different places sort of under our belt that we can compare and contrast. So should we start off by talking about sort of the biggest uni competition in the UK, and then we'll compare that to, as far as I'm aware, the biggest kind of uni competition in America. So that's Bucks, which is the British University college sport regatta, which is in end of April, is it? End of April, May?
April bank holiday, yeah.
Yeah. In the UK. And then IRAs, which is a bit later on than that, is it?
Yeah, it's the beginning of June. It's normally like the 4th, 5th of June, the first weekend then.
Yeah. So they're both sort of regatta races, so side by side racing over 2K. And sort of same sort of tournament style of racing, I guess you could call it. But we'll start off with a few differences. So IRAs, I know at Bucks, there's three different levels. You've got beginner, intermediate, and champ. Is there a similar sort of system there in America?
Yes, actually there is. So there's like D1 competitions, which is Division 1. That's where Cal, Yale, those sort of schools compete in. And then there's D3, I believe, which I can't actually name any of the schools who compete at that level, but there is a secondary competition which is for sort of more club setups rather than varsity setups.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And you sort of touched on it lightly, but who would you say are sort of the top six, like making the A final of the IRAs most years?
Most years, it's Cal, Brown,
Yale.
Yale,
Yeah.
yeah, UW, and then the fifth and
Harvard.
sixth, yeah, it's normally Harvard, and then the sixth spot is up for grabs. At the sort of last year, I believe it was Syracuse, but Dartmouth were competing for that sixth spot. Northeastern have competed for that one in years past. Princeton are sometimes there or thereabouts as well, but it's a staple. The big five is Harvard, Yale, Brown, UW, and then Cal.
And
Yeah.
whereabouts would Boston stack up in IRAs?
In years gone by, we won the B final. So we won the B final in 21, which was a funny year because of COVID, and we came second in the B final in 2019. Very close behind Brown actually that year. So yeah,
How many people per final is it?
it's six
Okay.
six crews per final. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And it's a regatta raced over 3 days. So there's only what three level four boats competing per team. You've got your first, second, and third eights, and then you've got the coxed four, and that's just at the heavyweight level. The lightweight level, I think, it's first and second eight, and then the coxed four. So no third eight for the lightweights. And then it's raced over 3 days. So Friday is the heat and maybe the repechage if you have to go through that. Saturday is the semi-final, and then Sunday is the grand final. So yeah, you only do maximum 4 2Ks over 3 days, which I know is different to Bucks.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the main difference I'd say at Bucks is it's a time trial as opposed to heats. Is that typically more of an American thing to just scrap doing a time trial?
Um, yeah, so I don't think oh no, I did do a time trial once, but that was because the weather was so bad on the Mercer on I think it's Mercer Lake in New Jersey.
Right.
The way that the heats are seeded are through the dueling season, which are a bit like the fixtures, sort of like the fixture series that we do here. There were the duels over there, and sort of you sort of like compare timings between different crews and see how you rank up with that. So I'm trying to think of a good example, because I know that Yale and Harvard, who are an easy example, they race way after the IRAs. But if you've got Dartmouth going up against Yale or Dartmouth up against Brown or something like that, you can start penning, like sort of putting people on a ladder based on the margins. So that's how those heats are set, or seeded, sorry. And there's also a bit of seeding that comes in from the Eastern Sprint Regatta, and the Pac-12, which is the West Coast competition for Cal and UW.
I guess that kind of leads on to our next kind of topic, which is what are the sort of top university competitions? So I know there's obviously like the Eastern sprints and things like that, but in terms of like dueling as well, I know that's quite big, and I guess is it?
Yeah, so there are some big grudge matches in the dueling season. I think a massive one is Harvard and Yale. That's a bit like Oxford and Cambridge, two very prestigious schools.
Mm-hmm.
And then for everyone, sort of like their own dueling season, that's their own sort of personal thing. People look out for like the Cal UW duel. People are interested in that. It's generally a bit of interest in sort of like Syracuse and Dartmouth. I always really liked racing Syracuse and Dartmouth. That was always a fantastic race. But then the big events really are the head of the Charles. If you're an East Coast school, it's the Eastern Sprint. If you're Western, then it's Pac-12s, and then there's IRAs. And then there's like a couple of other big sort of like interesting races, I suppose, like the San Diego Cruise Classic, which we know about. There's the Windermere, which is up in Seattle, and then there's a third one. The Redwood Invitational, which is hosted by Stanford in California as well. So yeah, those are the big three, or depending on which side of the country you're on.
And are they all head of the Charles is a long time trial head style race, isn't it?
Yeah.
But are the others all regatta style races?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So sprints, IRAs, and Pac-12s, they're big regattas, sort of like 6-lane racing. The Windermere is normally a 3-lane race. It'll be UW versus 2 people they invite. The year that I went, it was Boston University and the German Exit 8. And then Redwood Shores was a really cool one because it was literally a 2,000-meter lake, like 2,000 meters bang on. So when you finished, you had to hold the boat up, and that was a 2-lane racing. So it was sort of like just dueling, or like a fixture, but lots of schools there. So that was a good laugh.
And you've done the dueling with Brookes now, against Oxford and Cambridge, and you've done dueling in America. How would you say they sort of compare to it? So fixtures versus dueling.
So there would never be any clashing with the duels over in the US.
Did they like clashing over there?
No. No, you'd have, but it's apart from that, it's all the same format. the thing is, when you'd race a duel, it would be over 2,000 meters on a 2K course or something that was designated as a 2K course.
Okay, so is it always a straight line, like without a stream
Yeah.
on the lake?
Yes. So we'd at BU we do ours on the Charles, sorry, which was a river, but it was like very slow moving. And then other schools will do their duels on other bits of water. Dartmouth have got a lake, I believe. Syracuse, I think, row on a lake. Washington, they row on brackish water, I think. So yeah, there's all sorts of different conditions that you race in. The only one where it's not a straight line is the Harvard Yale duel, and that I think the inside crew starts slightly up. They'll start with maybe half a length.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in terms of sort of media and popularity of these events, how would you say it sort of compares to the boat race, would you say?
Oh, there's none of that. It's sort of because of the way that the rules are in the US, sort of like you're only technically allowed to row for 20 hours in a week. It's sort of a case of sort of rocking up, rigging your boats, maybe go for a pre-race paddle, race your 2K, chat for a couple of minutes with the opposition, de-rig and get out of there as quickly as you can. So there's no real media coverage unless big schools might do something fancy with a drone or something like that.
Okay.
But for us, it was always just get in, get out, do the racing. Yeah.
And that's because of, is it NCAA rules?
Yes, and it's weird because rowing isn't really NCAA governed in the US, or men's rowing isn't. But there's still, I never understood the rules behind it, but yes, it was the NCAA's basically.
Sure. And do they have any sort of power over anything else that you guys are doing, or is it just how long you're allowed to row each week?
There were other rules, sort of like drugs testing. They were allowed to drugs test you. There's certain things about sort of with money. You're not allowed to, this was before the rules changed in 2020 or 21, with the name, image, and likeness rulings. Basically, you weren't allowed to get an advantage for being a student athlete. You had to be, it's strictly amateur competition. So you're not allowed to have been a paid athlete at any point before going to university as an NCAA athlete.
So does that include scholarships or?
Yeah, I was about to say.
No, so scholarships you're allowed. Things like academic support you're allowed. So tutors, books, those things would be paid for. But say you wanted to store your stuff in the boathouse over the summer because you were going back to the UK, you wouldn't technically be allowed to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, because you're getting like an unfair advantage as a student athlete.
Right.
Sounds like a pain.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, would you say that a lot of guys coming in novices, or they've just started rowing, or is it a lot of people that have still previously come except they've just not been paid or have any sort of sponsorships?
Rarely do the novices and walk-on. They're called over there they're often referred to as walk-ons because they walked onto the team. As opposed to being recruited to the team. But they rarely last that long. And I think there's something about sort of you get a bit more cash if you take on a certain number of walk-ons, and that might be completely wrong. But I think there's something about you get a bit more cash if you take on some walk-ons, and try and develop new athletes. but for the most part, there isn't a novice program. If you're at a D1 school, there's not really a novice program.
Okay.
So that's similar to Brookes then. Yeah.
So we'll move on slightly here and sort of talk about the kit and facilities and sort of the culture as well around that. So obviously the picture that I managed to scoop up of you earlier to sort of line up for this meeting is obviously quite a high quality, like big media day photo. Was that sort of thing all done in one day?
Yes, so that was, yeah, we had media day.
Okay.
Some other teams would have more media days, like ice hockey, the football team, like the football, like our football, not American football team.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, soccer. Yeah, they have media days more often just because they were sort of around the facilities a bit more. But yes, so money, huge amounts of money going around, which is fantastic. Like it is amazing to be in that sort of position where you can have a training camp which costs the boat club. I think our coach would say it was $40,000 or $50,000 to send everyone, and you've got about 36 guys doing that, and no one pays a penny to go, and all your food is paid for, your travel's paid for, everything.
Is that included in fees that you pay at the start of the year, or is that included in your like uni fees?
It's not in uni fees either. It's so there's a Friends of BU Men's Rowing fund.
Okay.
And I'm a bit hazy on the figures. I know that we have something called Giving Day, which is normally the first week of April, and that's like a huge push from the whole university takes part in Giving Day. There's a huge push to get alumni to donate to the school. We have our own effort, and we'll write letters ahead of time to send to alumni. We'll get on the phones to call alumni, and we'll get around $180,000 on that one day. And the total for the year will be around $300,000.
And are you now encouraged to give to that? Now you're an alumni. Okay.
Yeah. Now an alumni, I'll donate. I'll make a donation.
Nice.
Yeah. So in terms of money, like it drives the whole culture as well. But you sort of we are able to afford a new empacker every year. Like top of the range empacker. And I've got so much kit. I think you guys have seen how much sort of like BU rowing kit. It's all I wear because I've got so much of it. It's good stuff. It's really good. It's Under Armour, good stuff. And I gave, I left about 2 suitcases worth of kit in the US. And I just left it with the young people younger than me who were still on the team. Like I had so much kit, and that's all paid for. And you asked Ben about subs. There's no subs to do it, so it's all you don't have to pay anything to do the sport.
That's good.
And that's I think part also with like NCAA's, like you don't want to be paying, or there's an argument you shouldn't be paying to do the sport. But for me, I don't think I quite agree with that. I prefer the culture at Brookes, because it's a culture of you want to be there, right? You're paying like whatever we paid this year. You pay that much, like you want to be there to do it. And having not having like that stake in the team in the US sort of takes away from that. And it also with the scholarships, sort of like athletes getting huge amounts of money off their tuition, it makes it almost a job, right? Like if it's $80,000 a year at BU, and you're getting a massive percentage off that, ends up being a job for whatever that percentage is, right?
Yeah.
And I've had that, I've had that. We've had, as scholarship athletes over there, we've had that thrown in our face, sort of like, you're not working hard enough. You're getting paid to be here. And we've had that sort of like thrown at us sometimes, which isn't a healthy environment. And I much prefer the culture at Brookes, where it's, and I can imagine that it's very similar across the whole of the UK, is sort of like, with that lack of money, clubs are a bit leaner, they're a bit hungrier, and it's people who want to do the sport, not people who sort of like see it as a means to an end, like getting that, you get your degree for a bit cheaper, and that's the reason that I'm rowing. That's yeah.
Would you agree with that, Phil? So your experience at York, like how would subs and things like that work?
Yeah, so York was a bit different in the sense that, so at Brookes, you pay a lump sum for the year, whereas at York, you paid almost like per month. So you paid your membership at the start of the year, which was relatively cheap, and then you'd pay per race you did as well. So trailering fees, race entry, and it would probably be similar to what we pay at Brookes, but still just much more cheaper than, I'd assume, your fees being in America. Yeah.
Yeah. Would that mean that you'd be allowed to sort of like pick and choose what events you went to?
Yes. York was also very different. We didn't actually have a proper coach like we do with Henry at Brookes. It was very much a student-run club.
Right.
So we would often choose to do events that were like more convenient for us to do, or wouldn't do events in London. Like we wouldn't always go and do Falls Head because it's just a long way to get down to London and back for the sake of 18 minutes racing, for example.
Yeah.
So the coaching situation in Boston, was it student run, or was it like a club set up and you attend that club?
It's a club setup, yeah. So it's similar to Brookes in that regard. So you've got a head coach, you've got the assistant or associate head coach, and then you've got the assistant coach. So you've got 3 full-time coaches. You'd also get a volunteer coach. So that's sort of like someone trying to build their CV. And they do that volunteering. So you'd have those 3 or 4 coaches. And then over in the weights room, you'd have a strength and conditioning coach. We had Glenn, he's a brilliant guy. And then you'd have, along with Glenn being sort of like the head coach in the gym, like head strength and conditioning, you'd have his sort of like, he had students who were, masters and PhD students in like human physiology, and they'd be coaching, sort of like helping him run the sessions like in the weights room. So the weights room was actually completely separate to the weights room, and the coaching in there was completely separate to the coaching on the erg and on the water. Like the rowing specific stuff was completely separate to the S&C work that we did.
Okay. And I guess that kind of leads on as well to like what sort of training you guys do. So you've already mentioned that sort of weights, ergs, and water sessions are all a bit separate, whereas at Brookes it's kind of Henry is there for all 3 of those. So how else would you sort of say that changes? Have you got different coaches for the erg as well, or is that still the water coach?
Yeah, so that would still be the water coach. Yeah, so you'd have sort of like anything cardio related, anything sort of like building the engine, as we'd say, that was done with sort of like Tom, Alex, and Emily. Those 3, and they'd probably be a bit more hands-on with the coaching on the erg, just because we use a lot thanks to the money, that we're able to afford a full set of RP3 rowers, and they try and coach us sort of like with the stroke on the RP3 during the winter. In
So
terms of the training, sort of. Sorry.
So would you say it's like a lot data driven, or is it a lot of pulling hard?
No, it's just pull hard.
Sure.
Yeah. So
Keep it simple.
yeah. Well, the problem with that is that it's everything becomes sort of just beige. Like
Yeah,
nothing's hard, nothing's light. It's just like everything is the same
everything
intensity.
it blends
And
into one. Just
yeah, and it really grinds you down. Yeah. So in terms of sort of like it's seasonal over there because of the river freezing.
Oh yeah.
You've got this big block from January, like end of December, up until sometimes March.
Wow.
I remember going on. So they're on training camp in South Carolina right now, the training camp I spoke about, and they would, there were years when we wouldn't get on the water until we went down south because the river was frozen. So in that time, it's sort of like 3 or 4 hard work ergs a week, and then the other 2 days would be like swimming and weights, like a bit of cross training.
Did you have sorry, did you have a tank?
Yes, yeah, we didn't use it that much though.
Okay.
Yeah, and then once you're on the water, you sort of replace those 3 or 4 hard work ergs to 3 or 4 hard piece days. Sort of like 1K, 750s, 1500s at pace, and then the 2 lighter days would be battle paddles, so just tugging it along at 22. Yeah.
So you sort of mentioned earlier that you're limited to 20 hours a week. So how would that be distributed, sort of roughly? And you kind of mentioned as well that was a little bit hazy.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a bit hazy. Sort of like the time management wasn't great on the coach's side of things. You'd it was always the end of the world if an athlete was late to training, but it was not the end of the world if the coaches ran over. Even if we had to get off the class, it was whatever, it's fine. But yeah, so yeah, that was the 20 hours a week.
I guess, yeah, we don't really, that's not something we have as an issue. Like, it's just nice knowing that we don't have to stress about time constraints like that in the UK, because I don't know.
think it works out about the same.
Okay.
Yeah, I think but I do think that Brookes rowing is a lot more efficient. I have counted it up, and I think Brookes is doing more volume, more time under stress or time under tension than BU. But BU's split was sort of like 6 days a week. 6 mornings a week. You'd be in house at 6 a.m., which is horrible, really horrible. Because it means getting up at 5, and it's just as a student that is ridiculous, because sometimes you need to stay up late to study, and it has resulted in nights where you're getting 4 hours of sleep. So yeah, six mornings a week, 6 till 9 o'clock, 6 till 8:30, 8:39, and then 3 days a week there would be, or 2 days a week, sorry, there'd be a weight session, and then one of those days would be 2 sessions on the water, or like a session on the water and then a sort of a work erg in the afternoon. Cool. But Sunday's off, so Saturday was a big night.
Okay.
I was actually gonna talk about here. So in terms of, I've heard at other schools, like alcohol is banned, like going out is banned. If the coach like thinks that someone's hungover, like that's a big deal. How was that sort of dealt with at Boston? because obviously in America the drinking age is 21, and
Mhm.
most people sort of start uni when they're 18, 19.
Yeah.
How was the attitude towards that at Boston?
The attitude towards drinking. That's how much time do you have? So we did have a 24-hour rule, which was you can't drink 24 hours within 24 hours of starting training. So that basically means that our day off was Sunday. You'd have what, 36 hours, 48 hours ish between Saturday training and Monday morning training. So Saturday was like sort of the only night that we could drink. Freshmen or people under the age of 21 will normally find a way to get their hands on some alcohol. But one thing that changed in my final year was we got rid of that rule because it created quite a rift in the team. Because you'd have the top guys, sort of like the scholarship athlete, the internationals. They wouldn't really mind that rule, and they'd sort of just go out drinking anyway, and they'd still be voted highly because sort of like you want the return of investment on the scholarship. So the internationals would go out drinking, wouldn't obey that rule, and then still get voted highly. And then you've got the other half of the team who are normally like the American athletes, who wouldn't want to drink as much, trying to work into the top votes, and then wouldn't see that hard work rewarded with the higher voting. So in the end, we got rid of that rule. Just like, have at it. If they go out drinking and they screw up their seat race, then that's their problem. And in a fair economy, that makes sense, right? At Brookes, like, guys have fun, guys go out, and they understand that if they go too hard and they screw up their seat race, or they have a bad day, they're going down. And in fair economies, that's how it should work, right? Like, the good stuff goes up and the bad stuff goes down. But it just didn't quite work that way. At BU, because of the money, like the athletes with the scholarships, they'd more often than not sit in the one or the 2V. Just because, not always because of talent, but more it felt like because of the money that was invested in them.
That's a bit of a shame.
Yeah.
Would you put yourself in that boat as an international athlete?
Yes, yeah, that was me. I was one of them. I was part of the problem. So I was part of that group, and I didn't go out drinking that much during the week. Sort of when we did have training, I'd try and be in good shape for that, because getting up at 5 was really rough. But yeah.
So you've just got a few more minutes left now. So we'll just rattle through a couple of the questions that we got asked earlier in the week. What opportunities do UK and US unis have to compete other than Henley?
Head of the Charles.
Yeah.
San Diego
Windsor boys went down to Head of the Charles, didn't they? This year. So even some boys schools like
St. Paul's
went down when they got the triple, and then the Head of the Charles as well, didn't they?
Yeah. There's not, no, it's a shame there's not a lot of opportunities, because I think everyone's always having this argument of who tees up where, like where does Brookes rank in the IRA ladder? How do American schools do over here? I think it's a really interesting question, and I wish it could be answered.
Yeah.
And I think San Diego is going to be a very good opportunity to see that question answered.
For sure.
Yeah.
And another question I got, this is actually a question from a guy I went to school with, and he's asking, how good do I need to be to go to America?
I was recruited on a very good scholarship with a 603 ergo. I had a 603 erg, and I had the Henley win under the belt, and I'd had a bit of sweep experience at Leander, so they quite liked me as a recruit. Yeah, so one of those, a big erg always helps, but if you've got and more often than not, big erg is go for it. But yeah, they like the big, if you've got something like juniors, like Junior Worlds or the Coupe or a Henley win, they really like that.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much for coming down, having a chat with us. Well,
Nice.
Thanks very much for having you on.
Yeah, no problem.
And I'll see you at training tomorrow.
Yeah, look forward to it.